And we are live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome to a virtual special meeting of the City of Dublin Architectural Review Board. The Ohio legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to have virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government. For the present time, we are holding our meetings online and live streaming those meetings on YouTube. You can access the live stream on the city's website. The meeting procedure for each case this evening will begin with staff presentation, followed by public comment prior to board review and discussion. To submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. These questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. We want to accommodate public participation to the greatest extent possible and welcome your comments on cases. Please use a valid name and address when submitting your comments, and please refrain from making any inappropriate comments. This is not a perfect system, and we will do our best, and we appreciate your patience. So if you would display the Pledge of Allegiance, and we will say the pledge. Okay. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of
United
the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, would you do roll call, please?
Yeah. Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Ms. Bryan?
Here.
Mr. Cotter?
Here.
Mr. Konecki?
Here.
Ms. Cram?
Here.
Okay, I need a motion to accept the documents into the record.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay.
Either one.
Mr. Konecki?
Yes.
Ms. Cram?
Yes.
Ms. Bryan?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mr. Cotter?
Yes.
Okay, there are no minutes for this meeting since this is a special meeting. So the case procedures, the Architectural Review Board is responsible for review of construction and modifications or alterations to any site in review district or area subject to architectural review under the provision of Zoning Code Section 153.177. The board has the responsibility to review and make recommendations on the following two administrative cases. Case 1 is temporary signs, 20-098 ADMC. This application is a request for an update to the City of Dublin sign code to comply with all the requirements of the US and Ohio constitutional, statutory, and case law decisions requiring that sign regulations were made content neutral. So Ms. Roush will do the case presentation.
Thank you and good evening. So as you mentioned, this is an administrative case regarding a code amendment for temporary sign provisions within the zoning code. We reviewed this ARB and the Planning and Zoning Commission in June of this year. So we had some initial discussions, and the board as well as the commission provided staff with some really good feedback and modifications, which we have incorporated in the draft. And I'll go through those here quickly so that you can ask, and you can ask any questions along the way as well. So again, as you mentioned, this is dealing only with the temporary signs. So the information that was provided to you includes two things. One is the definition section, which is the entire definition section for the entire zoning code. So it's all the pieces, just so you can see where that fits in relation to the rest of the definitions in the code. And then when you look at the draft regulations for the signs, you'll see a large significant part of that being crossed out. So that's just demonstrating that the definitions have made their way into this larger section. So We did not make significant changes to the definitions, really just clarifying based on the comments that the commission and the board made within the definition section. So again, I'll go through the general changes, and then if people have specific questions, I'm happy to answer that. So with regard to the sign regulations themselves, we made changes generally to address questions that the group had about colors and making sure that's clarified. So we've done that throughout. We've also added duration timeframes to a number of the sign types, as was discussed by the board and the commission, because that was missing in some instances, as well as then just if there were requirements, some of the definitions had requirement language in there. So I moved those into the code part directly so that it was more clearly tied to each regulation. So those are sort of the minor clerical pieces of this. Page 7 is really where the temporary sign section starts with banners. So with the banners section, we really tried to clean that up and then added, based on the board and commission discussion, about adding allowances for banners to be used in the instance where permanent signs have been approved, but they're not installed yet. So we wanted to help define that, the use of that, because that is helpful to people as they're working through that process as well. So we included that within there and kept that the same time frames. And then I moved the area requirements and the size and the height that was in the back of the existing code into the specific definitions for the banners. So that is, I think, the biggest change on that page.
Hey, Jenny, can I, I mean, do you want to do them by section? Because I just had a quick question on, okay, I just had a quick question on banners, just on section A4. And just, it's on the location higher than 15 feet to the top. So that's the top of the banner can't be more than 15 feet above the ground. Is that?
That is correct. And that is in line with our standard permanent sign requirements.
Because I thought we had a discussion about a banner that was on, wasn't there a banner for, and I don't remember, it was on the AC Marriott sign from the top. I remember we had a discussion that, so it had a special condition then.
Yes, it did. That was specially approved by council. So in the end, we reviewed this and did not find a way to really incorporate that sort of special instance.
Okay, so if it comes up again, it'll have to go, it'll go through a,
yes, a separate,
a different, clear,
Yep. Good question though. Any other questions on banners? Okay. So then from there, again, minor changes under construction trailer signs, just taking the construction fence piece that was in the definitions and just adding that to this section of the code. And then clarifying then that development period signs, which is letter D. So just removing extra language that's in there and help making that clear. Same for the garage sale signs. We just reworded the way some of these sentences were outlined previously to make that more clear. We added a duration to that, which I believe that actually came from the definition section as well. So just wanting to tie all those pieces together so that was clear. Nothing with inflatable sign or devices, that's pretty clear, other than just making sure the references are updated. Under the model home period sign, I added location and then added height and duration for that. So wanting to make sure that that's really clear where and when and how those can be used and the duration of that. Then on the next page, on page 14, the non-residential sale and leasing period sign, that had obviously the most discussion by both bodies. So the proposed changes that have been made based on that discussion were related to the number, the size, the duration, and the materials. So we have changed this to be clear that you can have, as was directed by the commission and the board, one sign, whether it's a ground, a wall, or a window. So you can have one. And then specified the size requirements and height requirements based on the type, so that was clear, because that was pretty before it pretty much allowed the same for all of them, and the group didn't feel like that was appropriate. So, and we've also made sure that is not greater than what our current permanent sign code would allow for these. And then in terms of duration, we are which I have an X in there, not a number, was, I believe we were going with a number of consecutive days, but not more than 90 days total in a calendar year. Oh my gosh, I totally didn't clean that up. The goal of that was to limit the total number of days. So I believe we were saying it was, in terms of definitely the total of 90 days per year. I thought there was some discussion about 14 days contiguously is what I recall. So that X should be a 14. And then after no more than 90 days in a calendar year, that should be a period, and the rest of that should be struck out. So my apologies for that. And then adding some language about high quality design and materials being a requirement for that. So
hey, Jenny.
Comments on that one? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you said the X number of days. So I'm wondering if we should allow like 30 days, because if someone moves out at the end of the month, they typically, might not sign a lease until the beginning of the next month. So I think 14 is a little short for that.
Okay, that's fine.
And then the other comment I was wondering about was, I know we had a lot of discussion about making these signs smaller in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you kept it consistent, because on the previous page, previous 2 pages about the development signs or something, the 32 square feet seems to be held throughout. Is that the same size that a permanent sign? Because I think we concluded we don't want the temporary signs to be any bigger than any permanent sign would be allowed.
Right. Ground signs would be allowed to be 50 square feet.
Okay, so 32 is smaller. Okay, yeah. That's fine.
Yep. And then the wall sign, I believe I kept that the same, but then the window sign, I made that 10% of the total window area, or 6 square feet, so that was, again, sort of more proportional and smaller in size. Okay. So is everybody okay with the 30 days contiguous, no more than 90 in a calendar year? Is everybody okay with that? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, if there's nothing else.
Jenny, just want, and material design, we talked about high quality design. I mean, I know we didn't want, could be plywood, or, there could be a variety of things. Is that up to a bit of discretion? I'm just, when it says that, certainly for wall signs, we have, or let's say signs in front of a building, we have some, certain definition of what that is. So that would sit in the same kind of area. When I say high quality, it's like I think the last meeting when we had the orthodontist sign, and I think of it high quality, I think of it like that. And these signs certainly for me don't fit the same definition. I'm just trying to reconcile high quality versus other high quality.
Yeah, and I think the challenge for this is and again, maybe we could definitely talk through what the parameters of that might be. So, if we're only letting them have it for 90 days, how much money are we expecting them to invest in this sign? So I was trying to balance, again, with there being some discretion at a staff level, but again, if we wanted to have some type of material.
Because that was my point, is if it's going to be up for 30 days, to Amy's point, nobody's going to spend $1,000 on a sign, and I wouldn't want, I wouldn't want them to do that either. Just for me, if there's some staff discretion that high quality could be something lower than we would expect someplace else.
Yes.
Not to make this, I don't want to make the standard of this ridiculously in the wrong place.
Owners. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
That was sort of where I was.
Okay.
Too.
Yeah, something greater than cardboard and marker. But...
Yeah, something.
You don't want spray
between
paint on a piece of plywood.
Try to find the middle ground between that and a sign we put on the dentist office. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, maybe can we say shall incorporate maybe semi-permanent, or
Shall incorporate design and
I don't know that we should use high quality.
Because we
That
use
might
it in
be
a
too
different,
high.
we use it in a different
in
concept.
another standard.
Yeah.
So we need to come up with a different standard.
Or it could be material reviewed by the application process. What is it going to be? And then when it gets to the reviewer, they can say yes or no. You know, cardboard pizza box, no. You know, whatever it may be. That keeps it simple for that person to just say, look, it's going to be this, this, and this, and somebody can go check. That's fine.
I'm certainly happy to have staff, use their best judgment here, but just to make sure that they don't get caught in this.
Yeah.
As Amy said, we don't want it to have the same standard as something else. So
Yeah, and maybe it's more of the prohibition of plywood and cardboard, maybe we.
yeah, could be. Yeah.
Yeah, discretion at the staff level, I think.
Okay. Any other questions on that one? Okay.
Well,
yeah.
the same comment applies, like right underneath the residential sign, you add as 14 days too. And just
Okay.
with the whole leasing concept of 30 days might be more appropriate,
Okay, that sounds good.
as we're on the same page.
Okay, thank you. And then, yeah, so we added the duration for the residential sale, and then we added a new section for sandwich board signs because it seemed like the direction from the group was that those should be permitted in all commercial districts. So I added that to that, as well as then, so this matches what is in the historic district code, the new code, so that that's all the same in terms of materials, because that's been a big discussion is, wanting to make sure that that's those are wood or metal frame with a chalkboard, not necessarily the plastic or PVC ones that we see in some. And then from there, I think, yeah, the last couple ones again were either, we had talked about under the seasonal business sign, removing the color
Hey,
restriction.
Jenny,
there.
sorry, I just have one click on the sandwich board. So if we look at 5, size and height, it has 3 feet in height and 6 square feet. Since it's two-sided, is that total or each side?
Each side.
Okay, so that, okay.
Do we need to clarify that?
Well, for me, it seemed intuitive that it was each side, but
Yeah.
just
Okay.
to be clear. Yep.
That's the call.
Yeah, just add per
Double-sided.
side, like
Yeah.
maximum of 6
Yep.
square feet per side.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on sandwich boards? Okay, again, and then the other ones were just clarifying the language based on the comments. So that is pretty much it for the sign code part. So any other questions, since I didn't pause at some of those beginning sections, any other things that you think we discussed that I missed? I did rewatch that meeting just to make sure, but that doesn't mean I didn't catch something.
I have a general question, I guess, just because we don't have the whole section here. Is there a place that references what the penalties for not following these sign rules? I just know like the sandwich board rules are broken all of the time. And a lot of the yard sign ones. And I just didn't know if anywhere in this section there was a reference to possible penalties.
Those are handled through the code enforcement process. So it may be referenced in their enforcement section of the code, which would not be necessarily part of this code, but I can clarify if there should be something added here just to make sure, because that's typically how we handle it. If somebody sees something, then Greg or someone from code enforcement would go out and work with them to put that in a compliant location.
I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. Okay, any other questions or comments about that? Okay.
I have one other question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not on this. I was just reading through the thing. And I just had a question that's a bit off temporary signs, just for me for clarification, and I'm not sure it's the right place. It was just as you go farther down here in other signs. So we're doing temporary, but how do we end up with standard sizes for signs? I mean, how did we come up with some of this? And the one that came out when I was just reading through is in 157, I think, G. One of them is as for sale signs, and I think the next section is like political signs, and one of them's 6 square feet, and one of them 7 square feet. And I'm just because certainly I know in this Supreme Court case, it said you can regulate size via the code. And I just wondered, is there just we just referenced that it just comes up through precedent or good practice? And it's only a question, it's only for my own information, just to try to understand where, because they're all a bit different in their sizing for whatever reason.
Right. And again, I think some of that's practice, some of that is, that's how the current code reads. So, and again,
Yep.
Since we're not changing the existing permanent sign section or some of these other sign pieces, I mean, I think there would be an opportunity to make updates to that. That's just sort of can of worms.
No,
So,
that wasn't really,
yeah.
no, I don't
No,
want
I
to make an
know,
update.
right.
It was just for me just to say, it's just, if you read through them, somehow they're all have a
different.
unique size for some, and okay, so it's probably just came from historic reasons, for sale sign always
Added
was
over
7
time.
square feet. Yeah, okay.
Right. Some of those are a typical standard size. So that's, again, like
Okay.
a for sale sign, that would be a standard
Okay.
size. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're all somehow different, but
Yeah, a little bit
it's
nuanced.
okay for me, but just as long as you're following,
It's
it's just
job
hard to.
security for all of us.
Okay, yeah, which
No,
I'm
just
happy
kidding.
for.
That's
Good.
not why. Okay, so if you're all comfortable with that, we are requesting that you all make a recommendation of approval, and we could make that with a condition that we make the modifications.
Before we
As
do that,
outlined.
do we
Yeah.
have any public comment?
We do not have any public comment that I have received before or during. So.
Hey, Jenny, I had just 3 minor
Yeah.
things I
Oh,
caught
sure.
in the definition section.
Okay, yeah.
So on page 12, there's a typo under your billboard. When you were crossing things off, you forgot to delete the word of in there.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
And then on page 15, I'm not sure that we should just list the last sentence where we only list 2 community activities. I don't know. I think that just makes it more confusing. I don't know that we should limit.
Yeah, just take that.
Just
part
take
out.
that sentence out.
Yeah, okay.
Like, why call just those 2 out? And then
Got
the
it.
only other one I saw was in page 17. You're defining the word extension, and you should
Mhm.
never use any portion
Yeah, the
of
word
that
in
word.
there. Okay.
So instead of
Okay.
using extended, maybe protruding, or I don't know, just
Okay.
right click and do the source.
Yes,
And pick a
and
different word.
okay, got it. Okay. Yes, I should have read that more clearly because I just copied and pasted those from the other one.
That's all I got.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, then I'm looking for a motion to recommend approval to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the proposed amendments to the City of Dublin sign code. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Mr. Kanaki,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Bryan.
Yes. All right,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item is the Historic District paint colors and alternative materials, case 2.20-130 BM. This application is a request to establish pre-approved paint colors and recommended alternative material guidelines for the architectural review district and outline historic properties. No vote will be taken on these items tonight. So I will turn over to Ms. Martin for a presentation. By the way, I thought you guys did a great job on the paint colors. That was a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay, so I did prepare a presentation this evening just to try to keep us on track. Couple items to consider tonight. So as mentioned, we're going to be looking at proposed pre-approved paint colors and then some opportunities to identify a list of alternative materials. So a quick overview, obviously the board over the last few years has been engaged in reviewing historic Dublin Code amendments and revisions to the historic design guidelines. As part of that process, some goals that have been identified include adding clarity to the regulations, creating predictability in the review process, and then also streamlining the review process to ensure the process is as user-friendly as possible. This evening, we are requesting the board's input and feedback on the pre-approved paint colors. Staff, in conjunction with our historic design consultants, Preservations Designs, has prepared this document. And there's quite a bit of information in there, so we welcome those comments. And then finally, there had previously been discussion regarding establishing a pre-approved list of alternative materials. However, as staff proceeded with creating that document, it seemed that the resulting list included items that would potentially be eligible to be a regulation, or items that were in line with some of the existing guidelines. So really, we just have some direction we're looking for tonight on how to move forward with that. So the paint colors document includes recommended historically appropriate color palettes. There are multiple color palettes in the document organized by architectural style. The intent of this document, as you know, is that once the board would approve the list of pre-approved paint colors, if a homeowner would select from the appropriate palette that accompanies their architectural style, that staff could administratively approve that, alleviating the process of having to go before the board for a paint color change, and then also alleviating the board from having those types of cases on their docket. So just as an example of how this would work, a homeowner would begin with Chapter 2 of the Historic Dublin Design Guidelines, identify their architectural style, and then move into the pre-approved paint colors document, where the architectural styles align with the guidelines. Based on, body, trim, doors, outbuildings, a number of pre-approved colors are selected. This is just one example from the Sherwin-Williams palette for a colonial style building. So transitioning to the materials, like I said, a lot of questions arose as we tried to establish a document. Those questions that we are seeking guidance on are, what was the general intent of this document? Who is the target audience? Is this intended to be used to inform residents, inform the board, or is it intended to act similar to the paint colors, where there actually is a pre-approved list of alternative materials? And what does that look like? Is the board still reviewing and approving exterior modifications for materials as they do today? Or is the board looking for staff to administer revisions to exterior materials? So we've prepared some discussion questions specifically in regards to the materials, as we're looking for the most direction there. So should the list of materials and their application be included as a reference in an appendix to the guidelines as supporting information? So this would basically just be a description of all the alternative materials that are on the market and what their qualities are and what the advantages and disadvantages of each material is. Number 2, should the list of materials and their application be incorporated into the guidelines and code? So we could provide some additional clarity in the code as to materials and their application on building features. So whether that be exterior material cladding, windows, doors, roofs, trim, and then should we, make the guidelines more robust? Number 3, should the ARB continue to review all exterior material changes in line with how it is today? Number 4, should the pre-approved list allow for staff approval capabilities if the application of materials meets the recommendations? And then, of course, any other considerations that have come up as you've considered the purpose of an alternative materials document. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or skip back to any portion of the slides.
So let's start with the paint colors first and address questions on those. I guess my question is, if someone wants to use a different paint vendor, is it just a matter of matching the color, or are these the only approved paint vendors?
So that's correct. If somebody wanted to use another paint vendor, they could take the color combination to that paint vendor, match it, and use that provider. If they wanted to use a color that's not listed, then they would need to come to the board.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I have a series of questions. Introduction, first page, first column, bottom of the column. Such as dark trim colors to complement brick. Seems contrary to federal buildings, and if you go out to New Albany, you won't see any dark trim colors with those brick structures. So I'm wondering where that recommendation, and then down below, are off-whites to highlight stone colors. Typically some people have the feeling that actually dark trim on stone pulls out the contrast of colors in the stone. A good example is the little brick building that changed their trim colors on High Street, changed their trim colors from brown to the white that's close to the mortar. So now that appears almost washed out, that building. Whereas when you had the darker trim colors, you appreciated the depth and the variety of tone in the stone. So I'm not sure that that phrase is accurate, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot to say, where did that come from? But I mean, the New Albany already is just a great contrast. They're trying to do period buildings, and it's all light trim with brick for a reason. So that didn't seem correct. I had a question. The stylistic classification of many of the structures is somewhat tenuous. So how do you, if something, because in a number of cases, it's based on maybe one detail, or these aren't high style buildings. So if a homeowner calls you and says, I don't know what style, how are you going to provide guidance in terms of ease the homeowner? Do you say, refer to the historic building inventory, and we'll use that as the baseline and the standard to make these judgments and assessments?
Yeah, so to answer that question, the Historic Dublin Design Guidelines, Chapter 2, under each architectural style building type, we've pre-listed the addresses under the building type that we would recommend. They could certainly, contest that if they feel there is a predominant style that is prevailing. And I think we would, work with them in conjunction with our historic preservation consultant to alter that determination.
Okay, that sounds good. The other comment I had is I don't understand why on page 14 under modern, light and bright colors such as white can be popular as well as earth tones and blue hues. And yet in the recommended paint colors in the body, and if you think of traditional modern buildings, I can think of a lot more high style modern buildings that are white than that are yellow. And now I realize the yellow and the olive we do see in some ranches, particularly out west, but white is such a common color for modern buildings. And you even reference it in the upper intro that I'm kind of surprised you're not giving somebody the option to use that for the body.
Yeah, I think that's a good catch. So we can add that to the body, and then I would just want to ensure that we have enough white selections in the palette, because it is one of the shorter ones.
And those were the questions I had. So
Okay, yeah, I think in terms of next steps, we'll relay those to the preservation consultant and, make those changes.
Frank, on paint colors, any comments?
Yeah, actually, just one thing. Gary, I was looking at the mid-century modern, and you said it says you don't use white. So I was reading it as you do. Light and bright colors such as white can be popular as well as earth tones.
My point was, Frank, that's listed there, but then under recommended colors, there are no whites listed.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So
Okay.
it seems kind of contrary to what I agree with the description above. It just seems contrary to the guidance that's.
Totally missed it. Yeah, I read it before too, and I read through the description and went on. Gary hit my one thing about the guide for people coming in, just so they know what their house is. Like there's not many Queen Anne's, but we list all the colors of Queen Anne's. Do we ever limit the number of different colors they can use on a house?
That is not limited in the code, no.
Do we ever want?
I don't.
Go ahead.
These guidelines either.
I'm sorry, Nick, you could repeat. I talked over you for a second.
Yeah, no, I think I talked over you. Sorry. It's definitely not listed in the code, and I do not believe it is listed in the guidelines or these specific paint approvals.
No, I mean, because I know that when you read through some of these, it talks about, like, back to Queen Anne, it says it could be up to 5 different color styles. But do we want to think about somebody limiting them? Like, I'm going to take my whichever folk Victorian and put all colors at once and make it look like the rainbow. I mean, do we want to ever limit that? Or is there even an instrument to limit somebody from doing that?
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly limit it in the code. I'm not sure it needs to be limited. I think staff is responsible enough to not approve too many colors. I think that's probably the best check and balance on that, is a case-by-case review.
So the staff then could limit and say, no, you can't possibly do that. Great.
You would.
Vicki, you're fading out.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going back and forth a little.
Sorry.
That's it. That was my main. Gary hit my 2 others, and I think that's my main questions.
Okay.
I was gonna say mine focuses on what Gary brought up. I don't know that putting this by architectural style is the right approach, in my opinion. I think we should do it by age of construction and what paint types were available during that era. Because as you noted, we do have 1 or 2 examples of each of these styles in the district, but over half of the buildings in the district do not fit into any of these styles. We are going to have a lot of buildings that are never going to be any of these particular styles. And then what do we do? Does that mean they have to come to ARB because their house is a vernacular style house? We have types listed in chapter 2, and a lot of the buildings have a certain type. They call them gable front or wing, gabled L, but those aren't styles that are given paint colors in this document. So I think we're creating a gigantic problem by having this according to style, because we're not addressing over half the district. My solution would be, like I said, to do it by genre or era. You could break it out by, pre 1860 or pre 1870, when they were hand mixed. You had a much smaller amount of paint. After 1860, after I think 67 or 1870, Sherman-Williams started doing mass production. There were certain colors. Turn of the century, the palette changed. Obviously, the 30s, Craftsman's era has a whole nother range of colors. So if we did it, then the homeowner isn't required to figure out what type of house they are. They only have to know what year was my house built and what types and colors of paint were available. I don't know. It would simplify this document a lot, and it would cover everything in the district.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is how the current guidelines read. The current guidelines are obviously significantly less comprehensive, right? The paint color recommendations are maybe 4 sentences in total, broken apart by eras. I think based on the way the guidelines are structured, we do have most of these categorized. The side gable, front gable fall under the folk category. We could clarify that or expand it in this document if you want to capture architecture that's more simple and vernacular. But I would encourage the board to think about continuing the alignment that's already in the guidelines.
What do the rest of you think?
What does the inventory say when if you were to look up XYZ and address, does it automatically tell you at the staff counter what year the house was built or even what the additions were? Because you could have a house with multiple additions over time that could easily change the whole style and structure.
Right. So the way our guidelines read is that buildings are categorized by their predominant architectural style, and generally that would be of the historic structure. So for the most part, we don't acknowledge that additions would significantly change the appearance of the architectural style from the street, which is obviously the priority. And your second question, remind me, was?
That was just basically it. Like you basically covered both of them in that if somebody had added to a house and changes the style with the additions, what year would they use for the paint if we went that route?
And the information for homeowners about what year their house was built is readily available as part of the historic and cultural assessment.
And you also said, as you said, every address is listed in the guidelines.
Yeah, but they're not listed by style. That's the problem. They're listed, some are listed by type. They don't have a style.
And then on the, let's see, first page of chapter 2, or actually the second page of chapter 2, I can share this with you all, is where the styles are listed. So all of these building types fall under the styles listed on, so like all these old ones fall under the folk style, and the Victorian style, and so forth.
I think you mentioned we really wanted to try to align those better, so that's why the guidelines, I mean, they do account for every address, and I think, and maybe the heading at the top should be the same as what is in the guidelines, which is building types and architectural styles, because it is not that clean. I think we definitely recognize that, but we were trying to make that as user-friendly as possible within the guidelines to help sort of pinpoint.
I think as long as there's an alignment between the two, so people don't have to guess. I mean, I kind of like it the way that it is, but it has to foot back to the guidelines.
And we wanted that to be clear because that has been challenging in the past to determine which building type or style. Again, it's hard because a lot of them are vernacular, but.
Right.
I mean, for the most part, I wouldn't expect a homeowner to undertake this activity by themselves. Yeah. I mean, our division is very accessible, so we would kind of coach them through the steps and ultimately lead them to the exact palette that they can choose from, and then they would come back to us and we would review their selections.
Sean, I think.
Yeah, for me, I like, I mean, because it's predictable. I mean, what we said at the beginning when we were trying to find some place to make the thing predictable, and Amy, I don't have quite as much, I don't have the detail in styles versus but I feel like if somebody wants to paint their house a color, there's going to be you could run into an argument, right? And I think to Amy's, we want to try to steer them in the right direction, but not put you in a spot where somebody says, I want it to be a certain kind of palette. My house was built in, 1860, but I think it could be a different place and I want to paint it like this. So I think having some clarity around that. I like this because I think it makes it predictable and you have something where you can steer people toward. And for me, paint is something that it's more in your heart and in the style. So it's something that's predictable in the past, or you can see it in the past and you can come to a conclusion, I think. So I like the document you did, I think is great. Just trying to make sure we don't have an argument, or you don't have to facilitate an argument when a homeowner comes in and says, well, I think it's this, and I want it to be 3 different colors, and you're trying to, find your way through that.
Well,
But otherwise, I think the document's good.
Yeah, that's where we come in, is if they're challenging it, then they come in front of us. We're just trying for people who are going to paint the same color their house already is, why should they have to come in front of us?
Yes, that's clear. Yeah.
And I think too, if we would notice a lot of applications coming forward because people don't agree with that, then we would definitely bring something forward to update that. But again, that's why we engaged this consultant to make sure that we're, using, that's not Nikki and nor I's professional expertise. So wanting to get that background, but that's why we're, here before you too. So if you have a fundamental issue with how we've classified maybe some of these buildings in the guidelines, now would be the time to be looking at that and saying, no, we don't agree. So again, we can deal with that later, but that's
okay.
Well, so here in the design guidelines, in not what we're reviewing today, but the design guidelines that you're trying to align this with, in the beginning of that, in section 2.9, where you talk about architectural styles, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you have 7 primary categories, and each category has subcategories. Those 7 categories aren't the same categories that you're using in what you gave us tonight. What you gave us tonight picks select subcategories and doesn't include all subcategories. That's where it's confusing. So if someone had a gabled front wing house, which is a type, not a style, and they come and look at what you gave us tonight, nowhere in there does that ever use the term gable front and wing, or gable front house, or side gabled house. So they would have no clue what color they have to paint their house. So what you would have to do is, like in what you gave us tonight, under folk Victorian, 1880 to 1910 or something, you would have to list then what subtypes or whatever. You'd have to use the same terms.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. We need to make sure that the 2 documents.
Yeah, as it's written now, over half the buildings in the district aren't covered. And that's kind of what I think it's gonna create a problem. So if we are truly deciding paint colors based on style and type, then you need to change your headings and make sure they align with this. Honestly, I think that's way too cumbersome. And again, I think you should just do it by year. Because all of the types coincide with years that paint colors were common. And I think that would just be a way simple, in my personal opinion, a way simpler way to do it. Everyone can find out how old their house is by clicking on the
look at it,
auditor's
and we'll come back with the best approach
So,
to make sure that's all buttoned up as best we can.
Thanks. Anything else on paint colors? Okay.
Before we move on, we will be bringing these paint colors back to you. So in the interim, if you all can look over the specific recommended paint colors in each category to make sure you have a comfort level with what's being recommended. If you find a color where you think, absolutely no way, I would not want to see a building in historic Dublin painted that color, we should identify those and eliminate them. So this isn't going to be coming back to you in the next 2 weeks or anything, but if you could take that time to do that review, that would be great.
And I have just one other comment as you're looking through to rewrite and whatnot. I would try to eliminate as much as possible. There's a lot of subjective sentences in there that something looks better than something else. And I think we really need to try to limit subjectivity. Most of this is actually plagiarized from 2 different sources. It's taken from, I mean, they're pretty common reference sources, but it's, and some of them, again, it's their opinion, and I could find you 2 other sources from someone else's opinion that says dark trim is better than light trim. So as much as possible, I encourage you to remove subjectivity.
Yeah, we can definitely take another look at that. And then if you have specific passages that you feel like are plagiarized, if you could email those to us, because that's
sometimes you cite them. I'm kind of concerned that they use one, which is a website constantly. They haven't published a book. Nothing is in hard copy. And I just, as a researcher, sometimes take issue with website citations. And that's what, actually, that is one of the primary sources that if you go to that website, it reads exactly like these guidelines. I could have cut and pasted and put it in here myself. So I just suggest that you guys or the consultant or whoever's doing it, try to put it in their own words a little bit more, and maybe not rely on that one website as much. Use the McAllister book, or there's some other fairly highly regarded actual books and not websites that handle it.
Great, thank you.
I have a question that may be difficult to accomplish, and maybe it's completely unrealistic, but you really can't judge paint colors until their section of the particular building is painted on the site and you see it in the conditions. And particularly when you're looking at a color and trim, and then you're looking at its relationship to an existing material on the building. Is there any way to make approval subject to review of a certain sample painted on the property?
I mean, yeah, we could definitely look at that, either painted on the property or a full-size sample delivered to the office is usually what we see. So like a full piece of hardy painted in the color, a full piece of trim. So you can see those in unison.
Yeah, even that, if you don't see it around the particular landscape or the conditions on the site, it's a lot different judging a full sample. Just a thought, it may be unrealistic.
I think that's a lot to ask.
That does feel a little onerous to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure of any place else that would offer that. Want you to do that ahead of time, especially a bigger city.
That's not even our current practice, honestly. I mean, they have to provide us samples, but if the goal is to make
this sounds like an architect.
Well, that's what we require on our projects. So. Exactly. All right, enough said.
Hey, Nikki, just as one blatant example of what I was talking about of subjectivity that needs to be removed, just so you can put an example to what I said, is on page 8, under Gothic Revival Tradition Paint Colors, the first sentence of the third paragraph reads, "White was considered entirely unsuitable and in bad taste, as well as bright green for shutters." Yeah, that stuff should not be in this document.
Okay. Yeah, we can look at rephrasing that. Yeah. I think some of the points are maybe valid. So we can look at, conveying that information in a different way.
Yeah, just remove some of the subjectivity. And then check, again, you're going to check your headers for all of it. But like under new construction, you had 1905 to 1930. So obviously, I think you mean we're bringing it up to present day, maybe, or not sure what. But otherwise, we don't have anything in here. I mean, you had modern listed as 1935 to 1975. But I didn't see anything. There was no heading as written that covered anything built after 1975. So it could just be you have a typo in your headings or something, and you meant to include it in modern or in new construction.
Oh yeah, new construction stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I said, modern goes to 1975, which I'm not sure where that date comes from.
It comes from the guidelines. So page 23, the modern style, the ranch is listed from 1935 to 1970.
Okay, so you're classifying it. Okay. But then, so I guess it's the new construction, the 1905 to 1930. But we need a category that includes the things in the district that were built in the 80s. and the stuff that is built today.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, anything else on paint? We ready to move to the next piece? Okay, there were some questions, so let's just start with those. Should the list of materials and their application be included as a reference in an appendix to the guidelines as support? Well, first of all, let's just kind of go back a step. Do we want to have building materials approved by staff, or do we want those regardless of if it's a new build or an addition come to the ARB? I think we need to solve that question first. I'm fine with paint colors being, once we categorize, but building materials.
I'm fine in select situations. Like if someone wants to put a new roof, all they're doing is replacing, their roof is bad and they want to replace it and they want a different type of shingle. Maybe they want to put standing seam metal or something like that. Like I would be fine saying these are acceptable roofing materials to replace an existing roofing material that has deteriorated. I would also be fine saying these are acceptable downspouts to replace downspouts that have deteriorated. You get much beyond that. I could feel comfortable replacing windows as long as the window opening is not altered. If we had a set standard type of window, windows would be questionable, but if you could put enough regulation on not changing the fenestration pattern or the opening or anything like that. But I could see it work for roof material, gutters.
Yeah.
The only thing
there might be smoke.
Are you finished, Amy? I didn't mean.
Oh yeah, I was done.
Okay, sorry. I worry a little bit if like for like, those changes I would have no problem with. Like for like, staff could approve. But I worry if you had something so dramatic like going from asphalt shingles to standing seam, it's a pretty big appearance change, and it could impact the way you see the whole structure. So I would say that one I'm not as comfortable with. And gutters and downspouts like for like, that's maintenance. I think staff could approve maintenance items, but there's so much. There's so many new materials that are coming out all the time.
Yeah.
And even windows, there are now these hybrid windows that have part vinyl and part wood, and then there's some of these aluminum windows that have some aluminum, vinyl, and wood in them, and it's just now maybe since I'm the only design professional, I feel like we have design professionals have more of a working knowledge, but I think in an open conversation, I think more people to judge these things, the better. So I don't think there are many that I would let staff. No offense to staff, but
no. Your
background's planning, which is not our background. So I think the more people that review it, the more eyes, the better.
Well, and to your point, Gary, you're right. There's a ton of materials, and that would just be an administrative nightmare to constantly have to, particularly if you put it in the code, to constantly have to update a list of materials.
Yeah.
I
agree with Gary. I'm fine with like for like, but any deviation from that should come to us.
And it's the same for me, and I agree, because for me, when you start to just, and what Amy says, if you start to think about the vast, all possibilities, you want people to be creative. We want our homeowners to find interesting ways to convey what they're trying to do. Trying to keep a list of this, I think, constrains people and makes staff have a lot of challenges to just try to up on administrative. I mean, for me, if I just look at the end when they're saying, for me, and not saying and not anything against staff and have more stuff come to us. But I think for me, the third selection, should ARB continue to review exterior material, for me seems it's not the easiest maybe, but I think it leaves the owners being able to come and say, hey, here's something that I think looks great and holds up well, and lets us continue to be more modern in the approach while continuing to be how we want the district to be. So I think it makes us less innovative if we try to force it in, because otherwise you end up kind of looking internal to yourself and saying, well, these are the best way, and they may not be. So, having high quality innovation and these things, and I think bringing it to us might be slightly less predictable, but the stuff in the code, it's going to be wood and the things that are in there, I think we can find a way. And I would tend to agree. I think it's more onerous if you try to pick every possibility and put some code language around that.
Well, and
So
we also have a holistic view that an individual homeowner won't necessarily have of what else is happening in the district. Frank?
So,
I was going to say, actually, well, two things. One is, was there an instrument to even add new materials? Because there are new materials coming, like Gary says, all the time, and he knows more than I do. Saw one the other day that's another step beyond hardy plank that I never even heard of. What if they brought that, which actually might be a farther superior material, but we would have no clue as to what it is. But actually, Nick, the other question is, how do other cities in their historic districts approach the same question? Do they have a you can use these materials list, or do they have a you can't use these materials type of list? Like, we don't want vinyl siding or something, or no awnings, metal awnings over windows, things like that. So Pittsburgh had some rules of that nature, where these are things you can't do, and allowed people to bring in their own ideas of what they wanted to do and see if it fell into that form. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. So we have not benchmarked other Central Ohio communities, but adding prohibited materials is something that staff has considered. Aluminum siding, vinyl lap siding. And I think that could be a benefit to the code. So if that's an outcome that the board would like to see from this meeting, we would definitely support that. And I think, similarly, staff does appreciate the board continuing to review exterior building materials. Like you said, it is a more holistic approach, which is why so many questions were raised as we tried to create this document.
I'm glad that they were raised. So I think that the consensus is that unless it's like for like, we want all others to come to the board.
Well, yeah, not only in-kind type materials, but maybe re-examining this list from the different angle of maybe these are the things that we definitely don't want to see in historic districts.
Right.
The metal awnings always come to mind as something that people are adding, and we don't want to see that put on the houses. So Gary, I think is that Gary nodding yes, he does want them on the houses?
No, I'm nodding with your suggestion. I think it's easier to come up with a list of things we don't want than things we would approve as alternatives.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't make it too owner. Again, I mean, there are certain things I think that we know, whatever they are, but you don't need hundreds of things on here. I think staff, you'll review a lot of this stuff and see that it doesn't somehow fit in the contextual. Maybe there's some things that people always ask for. We should make it predictable that this is not allowed.
Yeah.
I think there are some common things that would be easy, like vinyl siding, which Nick mentioned, and vinyl windows, and those are common materials that are used other places for different reasons. And I think you could come up with a handful of sort of taboos like that, really bad aesthetics in other areas that we know we wouldn't approve. And the metal awnings.
Well, I think also, I mean, just reviewing some other cities, even Ohio, wherever, and looking at what they've done. We don't even have to reinvent the wheel. We could say, oh, look at this. They made a great list here in X town. Let's take a look at what they have and don't have.
Well, the hard part is some of them evolve. And I was sitting in a German Village Commission meeting, and they've just a week ago, and they're now saying, well, we used to approve hardy panel for additions, but we're not going to approve hardy panel anymore for additions. We're going to only approve boral, which is a different material that no one's brought to us yet. That is a relatively new. And hardy panel now, or hardy plank siding, can only be used on a garage or an outbuilding, but something that does not touch. Years and years ago, when I started practicing, they were allowing vinyl siding down there, and you will see older structures that have been built with vinyl siding. So it's a little tricky. It is it's something that evolves, but on the other hand, Columbus does have a few products that they've approved as alternatives. The Historic Resources Commission, and I think it's on their website, they have a really pretty substantial website of guidelines to people, but for slate, alternatives to slate, they have a list of approved, if it's new, and then they have certain shingles, pre-approved shingles. If people are going to re-shingle, here's a pre-approved list of shingles. And then windows, they have Marvin's wood clad and a couple other wood clad, Marvin and Pella. And so there are a few things that they have put on a list that they will approve. But in the case of windows, you still have to come before the boards. You don't for the roofing if it fits in one of those. But so it's still not a super streamlined process.
Well, I think what it comes under is you can't legislate for every possibility that could possibly come in front of the counter for the staff. I mean, shingles is a great one. You can give them a list. Here's a GAF 3-tab, dimensional architectural shingle, et cetera. But like Gary probably can bring out tons of examples where it's going to also be really hard just right off the bat to say yes or no without examining it further.
Okay. Do we have any public comments on this?
We do not.
Okay. So I think that the decision is a little more work on the document for paint. And then as far as building materials, maybe look into a list of, we won't accept these at all, but everything else, unless it's like for like, it needs to come in front of the board.
Great. We can definitely do that. And I think we will look at adding some proposed language to the code for those prohibited materials.
Wonderful. Okay.
Well, with that, like Gary was mentioning, do we want to have a list of some materials straight off the bat that are approved, like shingles? Is a pretty straightforward one.
We're not, no, because it's only for if it's like for like. If they're going to change
in kind, yeah, right.
If they're going to change it at all, we want them to come to us.
Gotcha.
Okay. Anything else?
I don't believe we have any communications. Jenny, what do you have for the group?
The only thing I had was we're making our final revisions to the code and the guidelines with the intent of bringing that to the group in September at your meeting to make a recommendation to the Planning Commission. So we will be offering, and we're working on a date, and just a last opportunity for any public comment. Again, we've not really received anything recently, but just to make sure we've covered all our bases, we'll do that prior to even putting it on the agenda, just to make sure there's nothing that we need to address. So our goal is September, and then take it to Planning Commission following that, and then it would follow council after that recommendation. So.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. All right, with that, I say the meeting is adjourned.
Okay, give me 1 second here to undo the live.